Afternoon, and welcome to the complimentary webinar of the Unmanned Aerial Systems Cluster Initiative. This is part of our webinar series, and today we're going to talk about creating a quality pitch deck to attract investment capital for your UAS technology. The Cluster Initiative is a program funded through the Small Business Administration in Washington. I'm especially excited for this topic because one of our anchor events is the UAS Tech Forum. And it's August 21st, 22nd in Salina, Kansas. One of the most popular sessions that we host at this particular event is pitch sessions. And pitch sessions are very popular. They've been made popular by Shark Tank, but they've been around for a very long time. There's the bust and the boom of the venture capital industry, and in the mid to late 90s, there was a venture capital boom. And so one of the running jokes was that every minute there's a new venture forum taking place. And these all featured pitch sessions, which are a very strategic and can be a very integral part of seeking both funding. So we focused quite a bit on venture capital, but also licensing partners for universities, federal labs, and those looking to license their technologies, and also creating strategic partnerships. So there's a lot of different reasons why you would give a pitch presentation and why they can be a very important part of your funding or strategic partnership strategy. But we especially want to go through today some of the highlights of what makes a great pitch deck and why pitch presentations are so important. My name is Linda Radovic. I'm the program manager for the UAS Cluster Initiative. And we have two wonderful speakers today that kind of bring in both sides. One of our first speakers is Johnny Johnson. He's the president and CEO of Hilo Perspective, which is a UAS startup that is based in telecommunications. So Johnny has more than 25 years in wireless and operating, managing rural, regional, and national wireless companies. All the big name players, AT&T, Nextech, UAS Cellular, Telecorp. So you name it, Johnny, you've been part of it and have a lot of huge efforts in that industry. So Johnson led Nextech Wireless to be one of the fastest growing regional operators in the nation. He serves on the board of CTIA, the Wireless Association, and served on the board of directors for CCA, the Competitive Carrier Association, and was also recognized by industry peers and awarded the Rural Cellular Association's 2009 Outstanding Achievement Award. And when you weren't super busy doing all of those things and accomplishing that, you also were an outside for support of Big Brothers and Big Sisters. So our next speaker is Jeff Carpenter, and Jeff Carpenter is the principal of innovation strategies. He provides services in market opportunity assessment, tech scouting, due diligence, and patent monetization through his company, Bird Dog Innovation. And Jeff's experience, which is very humble here, includes product development for clean several years in university technology transfer, tech scout for a medical device company, and commercialization planning, due diligence, strategic partnering support for entrepreneurs, inventors, and technology acquirers. Jeff also is a small business owner and has a company in the travel industry that makes anti-pickpocket products for international travelers. So we've got two great perspectives here because Johnny, while you're both entrepreneurs, Johnny, you are in the middle of launching a startup and building a startup. And Jeff, you've done pitches. You did a pitch at the UAS Tech Forum last year in Broken Arrow. And Jeff, you've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of pitch presentations and helped many entrepreneurs put a pitch deck together. So really the mechanics of what goes into a pitch deck. So I want to give you each a little opportunity to say more about yourselves. Johnny, we'll start with you. If you could tell us a little bit more. There's a lot I left out, so tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on which part of the country you're viewing us from today. But first of all, I want to thank the UAS Cluster Initiative for their leadership in this industry. It's such an important, vibrant part of the economy, a part of everyone's lives that I appreciate, working with Harv and Josh and Amanda over the past several months, just getting the word out about UAS and the benefits that it will bring to the country. But just a brief little background on me. I serve as President and CEO for Hilo Perspective alongside my business partner, Jake Carey. I've got 30 plus years of telecom experience, been very blessed to work with some great companies and great people such as AT&T, US Cellular, Nextech Wireless. Have been a lot of experience in fundraising. I guess probably over the course of my career, I've raised about $150 million for various projects, including startups and greenfield builds, technology upgrades, and many other projects. But Hilo was founded in November 2016. I joined as President CEO in January of 2018. And prior to me joining, basically Hilo focused on the roofing industry, real estate, property, and then with my addition, we expanded that role into including structural inspections. But very excited to be a part of the panel today, and look forward to sharing some of my thoughts.
Thank you. So Jeff, tell us a little bit more about your background. Your bio is pretty humble, so brag about yourself a little bit.
You bet. Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate the opportunity to join your group today. What I'll mention really for this session is just a little bit more about my experience dealing with pitches. First off, way back when was with a startup company raising money from angel and venture capitalists. So we developed and presented our own pitch. Since then, I have worked on due diligence team, on the due diligence team for a couple of angel funds, including right now I'm working with the Keiretsu Forum out of the Pacific Northwest, one of the, if not the largest angel group in the world, Keiretsu Forum. And I'm on the deal screening and due diligence committee for their life science and impact teams based out of the Pacific Northwest, out of Seattle. I've also, for about the last 10 years, done a lot of volunteer work with business accelerators in Tech Open and City State, Montana, where we run teams through training and then at the end have speed dating or demo day type sessions. So really have seen hundreds of teams go through that process. And really, I guess the last thing is have reviewed a lot of FDIR commercialization plans and looking at pretty high-tech efforts to present a technology and how to make that come across. So I'll leave it at that for now.
All right. Well, thank you both, and appreciate you joining us and all the insight that you're going to add today. So, pitches are all different lengths. There's all different kinds. We're really focused on pitching to licensees and strategic partners. And that's very different than an academic pitch, for example, or a technology pitch per se. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and have you each give us, we'll kick this off by just starting with your best 30-second elevator pitch. I mean, everyone should have an elevator pitch because every time you go to a networking event, talk to somebody new, you're going to have to use it. And so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. And Jeff, if you want to start for Bird Dog Innovation Strategies, give us your best 30-second elevator pitch.
You bet, but I'm going to give you my elevator pitch for our travel products company, which I think is more in line and more relevant to the audience. So every year, about 20 million Americans vacation in Europe, Asia, or Latin America. And there's one thing they find is stick with mosquitoes no matter where they go: pickpockets. And although they're well aware of the pickpocketing risks and tend to be very careful, nearly 500,000 come home victims of pickpocketing theft each year. While there are anti-theft travel bags available, most are made in China. They include bulky and inflexible cables and chicken wire and are nearly identical to one another. Dare I say boring. So our company brings a fashion sense to the world of anti-theft bags. We use interesting fabrics and patterns, and rather than metal components that provide a false sense of security, use simple and clever design features that leave our customers looking good while pickpockets are scratching their heads in bewilderment. In short, our fashionable anti-theft bags to keep pickpockets by design. Remember our motto, pickpockets fail, travelers smile.
That's great. Thank you. So, Johnny, you've been on the road with Hilo Perspective, so I'm sure you've done this a number of times. What's your best 30-second elevator pitch you give to people when they ask you, what is Hilo Perspective?
Well, unmanned aircraft vehicles, aka drones, are a very important part of people's lives now and even more in the future. At Hilo Perspective, we have a national network of over 750 pilots nationwide that provide a safer, more timely, and less costly platform to conduct structural inspections. So with an unmanned aircraft vehicle, a man stays on the ground as opposed to a climber up on a large structure, which unfortunately they get hurried and fall and have accidents and may fall to their death. So with a Hilo Perspective, we provide a safer, more timely alternative for various industries.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And pitches are all different lengths. And so an example of kind of a quick pitch when you're put on the spot, when you're networking. So sort of why are pitches important and when is a good time to make one? Johnny, you pitched at the Tech Forum last year, and how did you know that it was the right time for your company? And what was kind of the due diligence process that you went through as you thought about, is the timing right? Is this something that we should do?
Well, I think when any company is considering whether they should participate in a pitch or not, I would say probably lean toward the previous, that it's an opportunity to position your company in a public spotlight and showcase your vision, showcase your idea, showcase your solution. And most of the time, there's a lot of people that may be looking for an opportunity to invest or an opportunity to get involved through sweat equity, or there may be people that are looking for an opportunity to collaborate and share the same vision. Certainly as we evaluated the Broken Arrow UAS pitch opportunity, those are things that we considered. Most startups or someone that is evaluating a pitch, they've got a couple of needs. Most importantly, they have a need for capital, either OPEX or CAPEX, or sometimes both. They also may have a need for expertise, someone to help, like a sounding board, to help them bounce ideas off of, just a sanity check to make sure they're traveling down the correct path. Or they may be searching for collaborative opportunities. So those three factors were part of our decision process to participate in the pitch session in Broken Arrow, and it certainly was a lot of fun. We learned a lot, and I got to meet some great people there too.
So Jeff, what advice would you give? I mean, if a startup or someone who has developed a technology for licensing and they're going out and they're seeking some strategic partnerships, where do they start and how do they make the decision to participate in a pitch session?
Sure. So a couple of things. I think, when is a good time to make a pitch? I mean, to me, every single time you're at any event, whether it's an elevator pitch, conversation, you are always pitching your company. So I think you should really think about it as there is never a bad time and that you are always doing it. So if you're not ready, that's a bad. So always be thinking about that, you are presenting and representing your company. To me, the most important thing, and I'll really just pick up from what Johnny mentioned, is, when you're thinking about a successful pitch, I think what you want to do is go in before you ever do your pitch and figure out what could be a success. I've seen many people who make a pitch where their sole interest is raising money. That's the only thing they're thinking about. And if you do that, almost every pitch is going to be a failure. And so what I suggest is they go through and they make a list of every single possible, whether it would be, having people help them identify potential customers, potential advisors, giving them feedback about their pitch, about the competition, about the market opportunity, maybe help networking into finding new employees. I mean, the people that you talk to, whether it's at a tech forum or any similar place, the networks that they have and the breadth of experience, so deep and so broad that you can find all kinds of things if you're really open and make it clear what types of value, in addition to strictly finding money, would be useful to you.
So you both touched on a really important idea, is that when we talk about pitches, we often think of it as for venture capital. That's kind of the standard model that we see. So how can pitching be important if you are looking for strategic partnerships, licensing opportunities? Johnny, you touched on it. You mentioned just collaborations. Maybe you're looking for a collaboration in some way. So, Johnny, what were you looking for specifically, and how was that important to your pitch?
Well, we attended several UAS cluster initiatives around the region, and always looking for collaborative opportunities, either in other verticals that we could provide services for, or expertise in those areas. Certainly I talked earlier about structural inspections. Communication towers are probably 90% of our efforts today, and we're looking to diversify those efforts. So we're looking at agriculture, we're looking at real estate, we're looking at construction, forestry, many of the other avenues that are out there. So as we're out talking to people, we're looking for those collaborative opportunities that, number one, would bring in new revenues, but also service or provide a solution for some of the partners that may be out there.
Great. And Jeff, what kind of advice would you offer? I mean, how would they tailor a pitch, or how would it be different if they're looking for investment versus licensing or strategic partners?
I think much of it would be similar. I think we're going to talk about some specific slides, so I'm not going to really go through that. But I think the thing that is different really is what you're asking for. So you have to explain your company and what is the problem you're addressing and things like that. And that is the same no matter who you're talking to. But then toward the end, you're going to say, here's what I want. If it's a partnership, the customer, if it's manufacturing, there are any number of things that you might want to be creating some kind of a partnership or deal, and just being able to be very specific and clear about what it is that a particular partner or meeting would do for you. I think walking into that meeting with a very clear understanding of what you want, and then articulating that is the key.
So, we've talked about how pitches are all different lengths. Sometimes you might get in front of, let's just say, an angel group, and you've got a 20 minutes to wow them with Q&A. Sometimes it's a quick style, which is the style that we use at the Tech Forum, where you get 6 minutes. And some people, depending on who you are, you think 6 minutes is an eternity, or it's a blink of the eye. So when you are giving a pitch and you're trying to get partnerships or funding, and what do you really want them to walk away with? I mean, what's the one most important thing that you want the audience to walk away with after you complete your pitch? I mean, Johnny, when you got off that stage, what were you hoping people would remember from, the 6 minutes?
Well, first of all, 6 minutes is not a very long time to talk about fundraising. I just remember standing up there and seeing Harv in the back of the room waving around, doing jumping jacks, giving the cutthroat sign, and but 6 minutes was not a long time. But what our goal was when we assembled our presentation and our deck, it was cut from probably 18 slides down to maybe 5 or 6 slides. But the goal was, and I think back at one of my favorite movies is The Water Boy, and Rob Schneider's character was kind of a Cajun hillbilly, and he kept on popping up in the scene. You can do it, and that's what you want to leave your audience with, is that you have the capabilities. You can do it. You've got the experience. You've got the team. You got the systems. It fills a need or solves a problem. It makes money, and you also want to create that urgency that, hey, this is the next best thing, like the pet rock was in the 80s. I better jump hold of this before it goes past and I miss out on another opportunity. So I guess those 4 items would be what I want to leave the audience with, is that you can do it. It fills a need or solves a problem. It makes money, and create that urgency that you better jump on today, because if you're not going to jump on, somebody else will, or this may pass.
No, that's really good advice. So Jeff, as you're, guiding people and they're creating their pitch decks, and they're wanting to cram everything into a small amount of time, I mean, really, what are the critical things that you want the audience to walk away with?
Yeah, so first off, this idea of filling in, if you've got 6 minutes or 8 minutes, and thinking, okay, how do I get all of my information into that? That should not be what you're trying to do. What you should be trying to do is, start with, and I guess I recommend, is that you start with your elevator pitch. That's the foundation. If you can say in 30 seconds or 1 minute every single thing you need to explain why somebody should be interested in your company, then you have far more time when you have 6 minutes. It's just a matter of picking and choosing the key things to put in there. Number 1, you need to say, what is the problem that you're solving? Number 2, you want to say how you're solving. But, to your question, what is the one thing I want the audience to walk away with? I want them to remember the pitch. How many times have you talked to somebody at a networking event or listened to a pitch, and later on didn't remember the topic, much less the detail? So there are ways, a lot of times what happens is that people talk over the heads of the audience. They either use technical or industry jargon that just kind of goes over people's heads. And one of the things I would recommend is that no matter what your technology area might be, try to create, use descriptive terms that every single person in the room can relate to. And as an example, you might say something, this is just something I made up, but you might say something like, you know that feeling when you're carrying a grocery bag and the bottom falls out. Your bananas are bruised and your milk is running down the steps. Well, that's how our customers feel when their containers leak, except it costs them $1 million each time. Okay, so with that first part, I've been able to convey an emotional kind of feeling that every single person I talk to would understand and relate to. Even if they've never had that happen, they understand how that would make them feel. Even if that is not even remotely related to my technology, I've conveyed the issue. And so that would be one thing I would recommend to people, is to find ways to present and describe so that every single person relates and can kind of feel that emotion that you're trying to, about what you're trying to do to solve this problem with your customer.
Yeah, those are good points. I mean, as much as, and we'll get into like the anatomy of the slides and sort of the information you want in there, but I think the important part is that you create, that people connect to what you're saying, that you create that emotion with, or Johnny, you said it kind of, what's the problem, that what problem does it really solve, so that people can really feel that. and that you show that passion in the presentation. It's as much about how you give the presentation as it is about what is in your slides. I mean, the slides are just there to serve as sort of a backup, but it's really about the person on the stage making the presentation. And I agree that the can be sometimes the most important part when somebody walks away. You always hear the saying that people want to work with people that they like, that they trust, that they believe in, and you know, Johnny, you pointed it out, sort of walking away saying, I think that's the guy or that's the group who can do it. So again, we'll kind of get into the anatomy of the slides because I think the team is an important part of that. What problem does it solve? Is that problem important? Is that connecting to the audience? And then, you know, who's the team that can make it happen? And do you have confidence in them? So a lot of times I hear from people, they maybe have misconceptions that they think, well, if you give enough pitches, somebody's just going to write you a check. Or if I participate at Keiretsu Forum, you know, or Rice Alliance or one of these large pitch events, there's just going to be an investor or a licensing scout in the audience who says, I saw your pitch, that was great, let me write you a check. But it doesn't really happen that way, as you both know. So what are some, you know, after a pitch, what do you as the presenter need to do if you're getting the most out of it? You know, what advice would you offer? And Johnny, what did you do? I mean, what made it more valuable for you to give a pitch, and how did you try to follow up after?
Well, certainly after the pitch itself, whether it's in a large group like at the UAS Cluster Initiative or a scheduled appointment with a one-on-one investor or maybe a group of angel investors, typically there will be an opportunity at the end of your presentation where people may come up and ask questions, may ask questions from the audience to the stage, and you just make mental notes or written notes as you can and try to catch up with those people after you're off the stage or out of the spotlight, and you know, try to answer those questions more intimately with those individuals. Try to capture their contact information, and I guess mostly be patient. Do not be so overly aggressive that you're trying to mow them down, and that aggressiveness may be good, but also may appear as desperation, which loses some of your leverage you may have when it comes down to negotiating the deal. But I think patience and try to answer the question as honestly as possible, but also provide factual data that can help reiterate the points that you made in your pitch.
Oh, that's good advice. So Jeff, what advice would you offer? So somebody gives a pitch and maybe there's hundreds of people in the audience. How should they follow up to really make the most of it?
Yeah. So first of all, at the end, I would remind everybody of your wins. What are your top 5 or 6 outcomes in addition to the investment money you might be looking for that you would like to hear from somebody. So make that list, and then as you're going through that list, you can have your last slide up, which is your name, your contact information, so that you've got that contact information for a good 15 or 20 seconds. And then as you leave the stage, that's the last thing there until the next slide. So plenty of time for anybody that may have any kind of positive feedback for you to check it out. And then secondly, be prepared if somebody says yes, or if somebody comes to offer you something. If somebody is interested in investing, they're going to have a request for due diligence information. And so you have to have all that stuff ready. Before you go out and raise money, you have to be ready to provide your package of follow-up material that they're going to be asking for. And that really is true for anything that you might ask. If you ask for, a partnership, or you have some technology to license, or, anything like that, you really need to be prepared for a yes, which I emphasize because a lot of times people are not expecting that. They kind of think, well, maybe I'm just kind of practicing, or I'm getting into the mode, and they get a positive response. sooner than they thought, and they aren't ready to deal with it.
So I do want to get into the anatomy of a pitch deck, because this is where I've looked at thousands of pitches and offer guidance. And we see a lot of the common mistakes, but I would say one of the most common mistakes that I see is how much time should you really spend on the technology? So let's just say it's a 10-minute or something shorter, on the shorter side of the pitches. People obviously they want to they're really excited about their technologies and they want to get into it. And you kind of touched on talking over people's heads, because an investor or the person in the audience may not be the technical expert. They usually have people on their teams that do the due diligence. And so you're not talking generally, most of the time you're not talking to the technical expert within that firm or the entrepreneur, the serial entrepreneur. They're going to find somebody else who can assess the technology. So how much time should you really spend, and what are the most important things that you need to focus on when you're talking about the technology in a pitch deck? So Jeff, I'll kind of start with you. You work with companies to narrow this down on a regular basis. What is the advice that you give them?
You bet. So technology is one of the least important things, and if you don't have time, I would leave it out completely. Nobody needs to know technology. Very first and most important is you have to identify who your customer is and what problem they're facing. That should be slide one. Who's my customer? What is their problem? And presenting that in the way that the customer would think about their problem, not how you are interpreting it. Okay, so make it clear that you understand your customer, not just who they are, but what they believe they need. And that's really the most important thing you can do to start. And then secondly, explain your solution. But the solution is not the technology. The solution is the problem, or the approach to solving the problem. It's a product, more than likely, that you're launching, or a service, or something like that. The enabling technology is behind that, but is not the solution in and of itself. And then you want to get into why, the value proposition and the market size. So none of these things have really anything to do with the technology per se. When I think about technology and where somebody wants to say, here's what we did, here's what we invented, here's kind of the idea, where I think that comes in is when you talk about barriers to entry and intellectual property. And again, you don't need to talk about it. It should all be in lay terminology that every single person in the audience will understand. And you should present your technology not in, oh, this is a great idea, but this is something that's going to be difficult for competitors to replicate. And so it creates a barrier. It's unique and something that we were able to get strong intellectual property around creates a barrier. So really none of it is about your technology per se, but how you're creating barriers that allow you to be the only ones to provide the best solution to solve the customer's problem. And it all comes back to solving the customer's problem.
Yeah, because obviously when they're going through the due diligence process, they whether the technology works, that's but what the value is more important. Johnny, your technology, it's one of those that if you really start getting the technical components of it, you probably see people's eyes glaze over, even people who are in the industry. So how did you sort of tackle that when you were, approaching a pitch? And does it differ? Do you take your audience into consideration?
Certainly, you need to know your audience first and foremost. If they're technically astute, then you can get off into the weeds, but not too far, because you'll become off or go off track. But in our scenario, when we're out raising money for Hilo Perspective, we just talk about the the problem that is there and how we solve that problem. So, for example, our problem is in communication towers. The issue is it's timely. It takes 4 to 6 hours for a 2-man or 3-man crew to go out and inspect a tower. So that's the problem. It costs money, 2 or 3 head count. It costs a truck row, gas, hotel, per diem, and then the time itself. So you get time, money factor, and then the very important factor is the deadly aspect of it. The tower industry, tower climbing is the most deadly occupation in the United States, unfortunately. So with our product, our technology, we're able to cut that time down to approximately 1 hour, which is less money. There's no one climbing the tower that would get in a hurry and forget to clip off or follow protocol and fall to their deaths, leaving the family without a family member. So from a technology standpoint, without getting too far in the weeds, that tells the story that there's the problem and here's a safe, low cost solution for that problem.
So I think the other area that people get very intimidated by is the sort of the financial slide, the one that says, what the return on investment is, especially in the UAS industry, because there isn't a lot of information out there like there are in some other industries that have been around for decades or hundreds of years. So they can really find that daunting. And some of the common mistakes I see are forecasting too far out, or just they're not really sure the level of detail that needs to be in it. They're calculating EBITDA and really going through all of the gymnastics. On a financial slide, what does an audience, an investor or a licensing scout, what do they want to see on that slide? What are the most important things that they should address? So Jeff, I'll start with you, and then Johnny, I'm curious to hear how you tackled that.
Sure. So first off, I don't need to see a hockey stick graph, and I don't need to see, a detailed Excel spreadsheet. Something, if you could present those numbers in the form of a chart, bar chart, or a line chart, and it probably will have some variation of a hockey stick, and that's fine. But far more important than those numbers, because I know and you know that they're not going to come true, right? They're estimates. What I want to know is, what is your plan to acquire and retain customers? And what are your basic assumptions behind the financials as far as, what are your costs going to be and when? What's your revenue going to look like and when? How do you acquire customers? How much money do you get from media? How much, how do you retain those customers? So those basic background assumptions that go into the charts and graphs, those are the kinds of things that I would like to hear you talk about, even though you might be presenting, the slide might show this chart, but I want to know, how did you come up with that? What are the basic assumptions behind those numbers? And the other thing you mentioned, I don't know if you want me to get into this, so I will. But is when you talk about the exit strategy, especially, for a short presentation, you might be merging a couple of slides, and you might talk a little bit about your exit strategy. And just two things I would say is, a lot of times people will say, here's the ROI that I think the investors will receive. And I would leave that off, because the investors can calculate their own ROI based on their own assumptions. And, it's something, if you put something out there and then are not able to meet it, or during your conversations with them, it becomes clear that maybe you're being optimistic. It's really something you're better off leaving for later, and letting the investors figure that out themselves. And then also, I would give up, people would say, I will give up X% for X dollars. And again, I would not present that. I think that's a negotiating point, and something that, until you know exactly what they have to bring, you don't necessarily want to put something like that out on the table.
Yeah, I agree. That's a common question that we get asked a lot is, how do I know how much equity I want to give somebody, or do I want to enter an exclusive or non-exclusive license, or how do I structure this? And I mean, the answer is that every going to something different. So unless you 100% know exactly what you want, which most of the time you don't, it's not necessary to put that in there, because you're going to get an offer and then you have to do your own due diligence and determine whether that offer is good for you and your company and your way forward. So yeah, that's one of the other very common questions we get. You know, sort of tackle the financial slides. I mean, here you are in the UAS industry. There's probably not a lot of market out there, you know, and you're doing your best to impress upon the audience the really the opportunity. What was your thought process, and had, you know, to get you to what you actually put in the slide?
We talked a lot about the opportunity itself and then the targets of that opportunity. And for example, the opportunity for us is there's a huge technology evolution occurring today. It's a race to the next G. So wireless carriers are going from 4G to 5G. So each time that technology evolution or that technology upgrade occurs, the tower has to be touched. So we use that platform and story to tell about this tremendous opportunity, that there's over 250,000 towers in the United States today. So based on the new technology that's occurring and evolving, the FCC, which is a government agency, forecast there's going to be another 800,000 towers. So we use those facts and statistics to paint the opportunity and to back that number up, that this is a tremendous opportunity. This is what we typically charge for structural inspections, and then just back into that revenue number, and then we have our expenses, and then the sum of that is the profit. So we just use the story and facts to paint what the revenue number is instead of just pulling it out of the air. We assume certainly we'd love to have 100% of that, you know, million sites that'll need to be inspected over the next 5 years, but realistically, we're probably going to get maybe 1% or less than 1% of that total mix. But still, that's a tremendous opportunity as far as revenues and profits.
I'd just like to pick up on something Johnny said. I mean, he used the word story a few times, and I think that's a very good insight, because really what you're trying to do is tell a very short story that gets people interested and have them come and ask you questions later. You don't need to tell them everything, just get them enough to be interested. But, you know, I think about the story, and, you know, we use the word customer and problem and solution and all that. But you can also think of it as there's somebody you're trying to help. You know, this is a person or a company. I'm trying to help these people, and I'm trying to help them solve a problem. You know, there's the protagonist of your story and the villain of the problem. Your solution is hero, right? So you can kind of think about, how am I going to present this so that it's interesting to people? And the other aspect, you know, of the financial part. At the beginning, you know, I said at the beginning, you want to say, here's my customer, here's their problem, here's my solution. But then get into, you know, you have a couple of slides about the value proposition. You say, okay, here's why the customer really wants this. I understand them, and you need to be very clear. You understand your customer and what they need, including how much they would pay you for this. And, you know, so this story leads directly to the financial. And that's kind of this crucial thing, is to think about sequentially. How do I tell these the parts of my story so that when I get to the financials, everybody believes it?
Yeah, it's true. That's, you know, that's a good sort of a motto. Make it believable. You know, I mean, it's kind of pitching 101. Anytime you use gigantic numbers, or you're too vague, or, you know, Johnny, to your point, if you're not segmenting out the actual market and being realistic, you know, those warning signs are already going off, and those who are listening to the presentation. So it's important to show that you have done your homework, that you've created a story that is believable. I think that's a good point. I want to get to some of the questions. So one of the things, go ahead, Johnny.
And that's a very important point. Procter & Gamble had a product many years ago, or I guess they still have it, but they had a phrase for the Head and Shoulders. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So as presenters are preparing for their pitch sessions, just make sure that you've thought this through, because you never get a second chance for a first impressions. But it's so important to build rapport with your audience, understand your audience, build rapport, which helps build credibility. So that's the number one thing out of the gate, is to build that rapport and ongoing rapport as you're communicating to your audience, but also have the believability factor in there, because if they don't believe you, I mean, they're going to shut down and let you finish your time slot there and then move on. So rapport and credibility is so important.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, I mean, we could spend hours on the anatomy of slide deck, but one of the things that we offer through the UAS Tech Forum is that the companies who are selected to present, they get the opportunity to work with mentors. We offer outlines of what a 6-minute slide deck should look like. So it's a good opportunity to either use one that you have and repurpose it, polish it up. We've had learners go through them, and just they always learn something from every experience. And the mentoring portion is a great opportunity to connect with people that might lead to a strategic partnership. So it's just an additional way to meet those and build your network and meet someone who might introduce you to the right person, which happened. We love to hear those stories. So one of the things, I'll kind of tell a story. We had a UAS Tech Forum. There was a person from NASA, a researcher, who gave a presentation, and there was a serial entrepreneur and an investor in the audience. And the investor and the serial entrepreneur ended up connecting, decided after the pitch that this technology was the hottest thing and they had to bring it to development. And they ended up, it took about a year for them to license the technology from NASA, but they formed a company around it and are operating today. So we got a really good question from one of our audience members. When do you get the check? What happens after if somebody says yes? And you kind of talked about be prepared for the next steps. What do you do? So Johnny, you've given, whether it was from a pitch or not, and somebody was ready to write you the check, what was your experience? How long did it take?
Well, the process can vary anywhere from a week, probably the shortest, to several months. It just depends on the organizational resources that are available. That may be asking for additional information, going through due diligence. They may need board approval or bank approval or funding approval, but it can vary depending on the organizational size and resources that are available. Jeff, I don't know about your experience with funding, but I'm sure it's probably very similar.
Yes. I don't necessarily have anything to add to that, other than what I was saying earlier, is be ready for yes. And I think perhaps the most important thing is, if you say to an investor that with X amount of money you can achieve a certain milestone, when you get that money, you better hit that milestone, and you better hit it on time or early.
Yeah, agreed. So Johnny, you presented last year. How has your pitch changed since last year? Is there things that you do differently now, or lessons that you learned?
I think depending on the timeline the pitch is budgeted for, I certainly get to the point quicker, where there's less fluff or less information that's probably not necessary. It is the experience really made me rethink how I present different opportunities. And I guess the number one, the net of my experience is get to the point and forget evaluate what's necessary and what is not necessary, and just get to the point.
Yeah, yeah. So Jeff, there seems to be, I mean, pitches have been around for a long time. I know it's only become sort of part of culture in the last few years, but I mean, people have been doing pitches for a long time. You've been working with companies. Has anything changed? I mean, there's generally a formula that is used. Have you seen any changes over the years in how, in what's important in a pitch, or how, if any changes that you've seen?
Yeah. I would say probably the most major transformation has come in really in the last 10 years, give or take, with the business model canvas that is now routinely used. And the thing about that is that really in the old days, when, especially, for example, when the startup I was with was raising money, there was kind of this process of saying, here's what we think, writing out a business plan, and then trying to convince people. With the business model canvas, there are two things that I think really jump out. Number one is that you're not making your own assumptions. You're going out and talking to customers to find out their assumptions. Okay, so and I think that's crucial, is that when you come up with your own assumptions to begin with, and start with the understanding that they're wrong, at least in part. And your goal is to try and figure out what is the correct answer. And I think that whole process is crucial and really valuable. The only thing I would say is that a lot of times entrepreneurs still kind of fall into the trap of making their own assumptions, especially if, for example, they've started with an idea or a technology that they want to work. And then when they go out and talk to customers, maybe they don't actually ask the hard questions that will lead to a no. They ask questions that will lead to a yes. So I would recommend, if people are working on a business model canvas and getting customer feedback, that they specifically try to identify questions that will lead to a no if somebody disagrees with it.
Excellent. So one of the questions from our audience is, should you mention your competition? And that's one that we get pretty often. And if so, how should you include that in your pitch? I mean, if it's a longer pitch, of course, you've got more time, but does it have a place in any pitch? I mean, Johnny, how did you address that? Is there competition in your space, and how did you tackle that?
Well, certainly, going back to my earlier comment about as far as building rapport and credibility and trust with your audience, I think if you ignore the fact that there's competition, and there's competition in everything, that it could be a cancer that destroys your credibility, that this guy or this company or these gentlemen have not completed a complete due diligence, and their heads are really pretty much in the sand and not aware that there are competitors that are out there that can maybe do it cheaper or better or more timely. I think in every pitch, competition should be mentioned. It shouldn't be a focus, but it should be brought up of the fact that, hey, you're aware of the industry that you're pitching, and this could be a credible threat, or it could be a credible complement to what you're doing, depending on if they're strong or if they're weak.
Yeah, Jeff, you work with companies to identify competition as part of your job. So what do you tell them when they're putting a presentation together?
Yeah, I think, well, number one, I would agree. I mean, I think the worst thing that happens, and it happens a lot, is that companies will say, we have no competition. As soon as that word is said, the pitch is done. And whoever's listening with money is going to say no. In fact, they're likely to tell their friends, don't invest in these people. So never say there's no competition. The competition is whatever the customer could possibly do as an alternative in addressing their problem, which may be nothing. They may just do nothing. That's competition. So don't say there's no competition. That's a deal killer. As far as putting it into a deck, you know, it's something that I think clearly should be mentioned. You don't necessarily, especially if you are short on time, like if you have 6 slides or 6 minutes, you don't have to have a competition slide. But when you mention your solution, that's the time where you can say, we do this, which is superior to what's out there because A, B, C. So you can just kind of put it out there so that it's clear that you're aware of it, and then if people have questions, they can come and talk to you about it later.
Yeah, so that'll be part of their due diligence also, to make sure that what you've represented as they agree with, that they've done their own assessment. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. This is one of my favorite topics because pitches really have been part of finding strategic partners for as long as there's been deals and as long as there's been startups. And so I think it can be a very strategic part of someone's long-term plan. And I think it is important for companies to, do pitches, do them often. Kind of to just the beginning of our conversation, when should you do them? As often as you can and as early as you can. And they continually get better and better. It's a way to polish. It's a way to get in front of a new group of potential investors and licensing partners. But thank you, Johnny and Jeff, so much for your insight, your expertise, and being part of the webinar today.